everyone should have a panel on their right-hand side, and you should see a little hand icon. If you could raise your hand to let me know that you are able to listen to us or hear us. Okay, I see Vanette, Michelle, and Melanie. Gilda and Juanita. Okay, I see Juanita. Gilda, are you able to hear us? Okay, everyone can go ahead and put their hands down. I will be monitoring this webinar. So if you have any questions, you're able to type it into the right-hand corner where it says questions, and it will pop up on my screen, and I will go ahead and let Heather know once those come up. We're going to do most of the questions at the end, but if you have a pressing question, you can always type that into that box. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Heather, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to take this webinar. I'm Heather Ashwell-Hare. I'm the Vice President of Leadership for Texas PTA, and some of you know I'm the lead for the Dallas ISD PTA Revitalization Team. This is one of our Spotlights workshops, which means it is on a very specific topic, and that is nominating committee and elections. There we go. So just the learning objectives, just so you know what we're going to be covering here, is we want you to be familiar with what the nominating committee does and understand how the members are elected. They are elected, not appointed, so that's one of the big things we're going to be covering. And also just to get a sense of who serves on this committee and what that committee looks like, where you can find information about that. And then the second part of the workshop is going to be on elections of officers. So there's elections of nominating committee, and then there's elections of officers. So understanding that whole timeline and how that works, and also some kind of frequently asked questions or tips when there are special circumstances. What things can you do? And the reason we're doing this, a big reason, is that the nominating committee especially is a little bit misunderstood, and its job is to really help ensure the future of your PTA. The nominating committee is the group of people who are going to do kind of like a job search for the officers, the elected officers of your PTA. And it should not be overwhelming and stressful or confusing. And so we really wanted to do this workshop and record it so people can come back and watch it anytime they want to really go over some of the different resources available to you and just give you a good overview of how this all works. So the first thing that is really going to be your guideline for both the nominating committee and the election of officers is going to be your bylaws. The bylaws are going to tell you, you're going to hear me refer to them throughout this workshop. They're going to give you all of your basic information, and everyone has bylaws. And then standing rules, not everyone has standing rules. So if you have bylaws, when you request a copy of your bylaws on the Texas PTA website, you will get a copy of your standing rules if you have them. And we're going to go into that detail as well. They might offer you additional information about this whole process or about your officers. And then the other resource we're going to be talking about is the Texas PTA Basics Parliamentarian Resource Guide. And that is also found on the txpta.org website. Now, I can show you that at the end where to find that. So first of all, let's look at our bylaws. What do they tell us? They tell us that only members of our PTA association can serve in any appointed or elected position. So you have to be a member to be elected, to be appointed. The article, this is in Article 5 of your bylaws, and when you look through your bylaws, you're going to see that very, very, very clearly written. Article 6 is going to list who your elected officers are and what their duties are. So it's going to go through, it's going to define the term of office, which is 1 year. and going to say that the person must join the PTA by the time they take office. And so if they're not already a member, they can join right away, and as long as they join by the time they take office, then they are considered a member. The elected officers could be a variety of people, and so we really want to make sure we check our bylaws to see what they say, because sometimes people think certain people sit on the board or certain people are elected, but only those people listed in this Article 6 section are going to be your elected officers. Article 7 gives you the details of your nominating committee members. It's going to tell you how many people you have on the committee, how many alternates, how are they elected, and what their duties are, including their report. This same article is also going to name your election month. And so whatever month your election is held in, it's typically March or April is when your election is. Some people elect in May. You need to elect your nominating committee prior to that meeting. And so this is going to help us with our timeline when we start talking about timelines. And then we also, in our bylaws, are going to see in Article 9, general board duties and eligibility. It talks about people are only eligible to serve if they believe in and support the mission and purposes and policies of PTA, that they do agree to join the PTA, that they're not going to get any compensation. They are volunteers. They're going to do this out of the goodness of their heart, except maybe, obviously reimbursement for things that they purchase that are approved. And you can only serve in the same position for 2 years in a row. So if you're a treasurer, you can be re-elected to be a treasurer a second year, and then you can't be the treasurer a third year. You need to move on to a different position or find something else that you are interested in doing. There's also a provision in that section that talks about student members. Not all of us have students, but if you are in a middle school or a high school, you may have students who are active participants on your board. They can't be a president, a first vice president, treasurer, or secretary, which are kind of our main officers for most PTAs. They can't be a signer on the bank account. And they can't be approved to be the person to open and review and initial the bank statements. They can't hold a majority of the offices. And again, some of your PTAs have, I know one PTA has got 8 vice presidents, and so they would all be elected positions. So even though students might not be one of those 4 main officers, they may be in one of the other officer positions and like I said, would not be able to hold a majority of the offices. We talked a little bit about the standing rules. There may be, like I said, additional officers in there, or particularly the duties of officers is what's going to be in there. And so your vice president of membership, for instance, could be responsible for the Life Membership Committee. They would want to know that before they signed up and agreed to be nominated to be the vice president of membership. So you always want to look at your standing rules and see, are there any additional duties or any different additional responsibilities that might be above and beyond what's in the bylaws. And those standing rules are unique to your PTA. The bylaws are pretty standard wording across all PTAs. You have certain choices that you make within your PTA, but the standing rules really are to guide operations that aren't covered in the bylaws that you want to make sure happen in your PTA. And so there could be rules about how the tellers committee is made up. There could be ballot vote instructions or even a definition of what an illegal ballot vote would look like. So it's possible that you have something in there that might guide you in some of this process. So you always want to look there. And again, if you're not sure about some of these things, you want to look in that parliamentarian resource guide. So like I mentioned, the nominating committee is elected at a meeting prior to the election meeting. This is a regular PTA association meeting, meaning your members would all be present. It is not the board who elects the nominating committee, it is your members. And because their report has to be publicized 7 days before the election, we want to make sure we give them time to talk with the current board members and fill that slate with people that they think are the best candidates for a position. So for instance, if your election meeting were in April, then you would have to elect your nominating committee at the meeting prior. Well, your bylaws you may not meet in March per your bylaws. And so that would mean you have to elect your nominating committee in February. So you need to really kind of be aware of that, and if you discover that you kind of haven't been following this timeline, I really encourage you to make some notes and help out the next president, the next group that's doing this, and the parliamentarian, if they can go through the bylaws and look at this, and make sure that you can stick within those bylaws as best possible. So the nominating committee. They are a special committee, which means that they are formed for a specific purpose and then they go away. They are not in place all year round. There is not, it's not a preset group that continues for the whole year. They do get elected, like I said, at that meeting prior to your election meeting. And in your bylaws, it is going to say how many members are in that committee. And your choices there are 3 members, 5 members, or 7 members. And you will have selected the size of your, how many you want on your nominating committee. If you discover that you are not happy with the number of nominating committee members that it says in your bylaws, you can do a bylaws amendment. And that's another workshop, which we'll be doing later on in the spring, on amending your bylaws and submitting bylaws for approval to Texas PTA. And we'll also look at standing rules. But that is something that you can change. But in the meantime, right now, whatever your bylaws say the number of members are, that's what you are going to be working with. Like I mentioned, students cannot be a majority of this committee either. And the president is the only person who cannot serve on that committee. People should not serve, and this is in your bylaws, cannot serve on the nominating committee 2 years in a row. So if you were on the nominating committee last year, then you're not eligible to serve this year. And then this is not in the bylaws, but just general guidelines. You want your nominating committee to be representative of your campus community. If you have all 5th grade parents on your nominating committee, it makes it very, very difficult to slate a variety of people as officers because, let's face it, 5th grade parents pretty much know other 5th grade parents. So you want to have some people from the different age groups. A lot of schools bring in parents from a wider community than just their neighborhood. And if that's the case, you want to have geographical representation. It's really nice to have a staff person on there because they might know different volunteers than maybe some of the PTA people. And just really, you just want to, whatever your campus looks like, you kind of want to have some representation from all of those different groups that are on your campus. If you've got single parents, if you've got grandparents, if you have Spanish speaking, if you have Hindu, I mean, whatever you have on your campus, ideally, you don't want to have all 3 of your nominating committee members from one of those groups. You want as much variety as possible. Now, we also elect alternates. And the number of those is also going to be in your bylaws. And it is 1, 2, or 3 alternates. And the reason we have those is, let's say you have a committee of 3 nominating committee members and they're elected, and you go to meet and one of the committee members' child gets sick, or they have a car accident, or something happens, and they're just not able to meet, and they're not going to be able to meet for the next couple of weeks. It's just not going to be possible for them to get together. And you really kind of need to get the work done over the next 2 or 3 weeks because this is a special committee. It is only formed for this specific purpose. And so if you have an alternate in place, that person will then become the committee member, and the original person who was elected would withdraw and not be part of the committee anymore. So you want to have those people as backups so that they can just smoothly move into that position quite easily. The chair of the committee is elected by the committee. And so this is also something that's really unique to the nominating committee. Typically, when typically committees are appointed, this committee is elected, and typically the president will appoint the chair of the committee. That is not the case in nominating committee. So right after they're elected, and we're going to talk about how they get elected, but right after they're elected, that committee, that group of 3 or 5 or 7 people, plus their alternates, because we don't know if the alternates are going to end up serving, get together. Usually we encourage them to do that immediately at that meeting. A lot of times the parliamentarian will have copies of the bylaws, the standing rules, and I believe you got emailed a nominating committee guide. If the parliamentarian can have that all copied, ready to go, as soon as those members are elected, the parliamentarian asks them to stay after the meeting for just like 3 minutes, gives them each their packages, and gives them the instruction, to then elect their own chair. The parliamentarian doesn't have anything to do with that, just gives them that instruction. So if they can elect that chair right there while they're all there, then they know who that person is, and that person can kind of take charge of communications and get that first meeting set up. So it's just a little bit different of a committee than most of the committees that we think of. The election process then for the nominating committee, just like any other business that comes before the membership, the president does conduct the election of the nominating committee. So the president, at that point in the agenda, will say, it's now time for us to elect our nominating committee, and the floor is now open for nominations. And there is a script for all kinds of business processes, including election of nominating committee, in the President's Resource Guide. We've talked about the Parliamentarian Resource Guide. There's also the President's Resource Guide, and we have a little, what we call a build-a-script, where you can take bits and pieces depending on what you need for any particular meeting, and you can print those sections out. So the president would open the floor for nominations, and members can then be nominated by others, or they can self-nominate. The thing is, you need to elect these people at the nominating committee election meeting. And so oftentimes the president is standing kind of almost begging for, I got to have somebody, I got to have 3 people, we need 3 people for the nominating committee. And so a lot of times we will kind of recruit people who are interested in doing that ahead of time, and encourage them to nominate themselves, encourage people to be thinking about who might be great on the nominating committee. Would you ask them if they would be interested in being nominated? So just like we do with our committees and our volunteers and even for the officers, it's always good to have a good pool of people that are interested. But it has to happen at that meeting. The election takes place before the members. The members have to vote on these people. So even if you have kind of a list of people who are interested, they need to either self-nominate or be nominated by somebody else. Now, a person doesn't have to actually be present at that meeting to be nominated, as long as they have given consent to serve on the committee. So if I, know somebody who would be great for this, I ask them in advance, can I nominate you? Would you be willing to do this if you get elected? They say yes. I could nominate them. The president opens the floor for nominations. I put my hand up. The president recognizes me, and I say, I would like to nominate John Smith, to be on the nominating committee. The president will ask me, is John here? No, he's not here, but he's given his consent. It's like, okay, fine. So then his name could be added to the list of potential nominating committee members. Now, if you get, let's say you need 3 people for your nominating committee. If only 3 people are nominated, then you can elect them as the committee. But if you had 5 people elected, then you need to do a ballot vote. And so we're going to talk about, we need to have, the parliamentarian should always have ballots on hand. I call them 3x5 index cards. I just carry a stack with me. And we encourage secretaries to carry some with them also, because we don't always have a parliamentarian. And so it's really nice for the secretary to have that on hand. Worst case scenario, you get some scrap pieces of paper or a little notepad and use those. But so when you have a ballot vote, the president needs to appoint a tellers committee. And so they are going to appoint 3 to 5, you want it to be an odd number of people. They're going to appoint 3 to 5 impartial PTA members who are not essential to the business of the meeting. So you don't want to appoint your secretary. They need to stay there to keep the minutes. If you're going to go on with some other business while the ballot counting is happening, you're not going to appoint the person who's going to be giving the next report, maybe your membership person, or you've got a fundraiser coming up, you need that person to give a report. This is a great way to get PTA members involved that aren't on the board. These do not have to be board members. They just have to be PTA members. So the president will appoint those 3 to 5 people. 3 is fine, especially if you don't have that many to count. The tellers committee will then distribute the ballots, and it is going to have to be based on being a member. So only members can get those ballots. A lot of times what I see happen to speed this up is as people arrive to any election meeting, whether it's the nominating committee or whether it's for the officers, as they arrive, they are checked in on a membership list. If they are a member, they just automatically get given a voting card. If they had their actual PTA membership card with them, that would be great, but a lot of people don't carry their membership card with them. And so as they come in, they just automatically get given a ballot. If you don't use it, just ask them to leave them and you can reuse them the next time. If you do need a ballot, you're already all set up ready for that ballot, and it makes it really, really easy. But if not, they are only distributed to members. The instructions would be to the members if you needed 3 people on your committee and you had 5 people nominated, you would ask the members to write 3 names on the ballot. And then the tellers committee would collect those ballots, and they would take all those ballots to a private place, and they would count those ballot votes. And so you've got 5 people, everybody's writing 3 names, so you're going to end up probably with votes for all 5 people, but they're going to be different numbers. When the tellers committee writes up their count, they need to report the total number of ballots cast, the number of votes cast for each person, and the number of illegal votes. And an illegal vote would be if somebody wrote in a person's name who had not been nominated, or a person wrote in Mickey Mouse or some fictional name, or if they wrote 4 names when they had been instructed to write 3. So those would all be illegal votes, and so they would get put aside. And so, for instance, if you had 50 ballots cast, you would name off John Smith got 10 votes, Susie Q got 12 votes, etc., and there were 2 illegal votes. And then how the nominating committee works is by plurality. And what that means is the people with the most votes are the nominating committee, and the next greatest number of votes would be your first alternate, and the next greatest number of votes after that is going to be your second alternate. And that is all in the bylaws. And so that would get, the tellers committee would report that vote, and then the president is going to repeat that vote. They're going to read it again, and the president declares the outcome of the vote. The nominating committee members are John Smith, Susie Q, Brent Seaver, and our first alternate is so-and-so, second alternate is so-and-so. And so they would do that. I'm going to go back just a second before I leave the ballot voting. I do want to mention that you don't want to store those ballots forever. And so at the end of any ballot vote, you want to have a motion to destroy the ballots. And you can say after 24 hours, quite honestly, in Robert's rules, after the meeting is adjourned, there can't be a recount of those. It has to, if someone contests the count, they need to do that during the meeting. And so you just want to have a motion to destroy those ballots at the end, just because you don't want to store them forever and ever. And a lot of people have a standing rule that just puts it in place. Anytime there is a ballot vote, the ballots will be destroyed within 24 hours after the close of the meeting or something like that. And so that does need a second and a majority vote to approve destroying the ballots. And like I said, it's just a convenience thing that you don't want to keep those with the secretary's minutes. So nominating committee duties. So the job, like I mentioned earlier, of the nominating committee is to determine the best candidate for each elected officer that's listed in your bylaws. They want to talk to the current officers. They want to read those bylaws. They want to make sure that they understand what the duties are, and find out from each person what was their commitment, time commitment, what kind of skills did they wish they had, or did they use a lot of to be able to perform that task. If somebody's done a great job, then they could be a great candidate to return for their second term. If they haven't done a great job, maybe they can identify what they might do better. Maybe they tried to take on treasurer and they can't even balance their own checkbook, but they were just kind of helping people out and tried to be treasurer, and they're like, oh my gosh, that was the worst job for me ever. I wish I could do hospitality. It's like, well, perfect. We'll put your name in for something different. And so you really want to try and match the best person for each position, and match their skills and interests, and their level of commitment. Again, you want to have representation from a variety of grades, and you want it to be reflective of your membership. I've seen where just by chance people, you have heavily 4th, 5th grade in elementary, or maybe you've got all senior parents in high school, and it really leaves it difficult. You don't want to have a full turnover of your board every year. You want to have some people returning. You want to have some people who are kind of been around a while, got some good history, but you always want to be bringing new people onto your board, so that you get new ideas, and you're always building that for the future. So you want to be thinking about that as a nominating committee. The nominating committee will prepare a report, and it is going to have one person nominated for each elected officer. And there is a sample in that little guide that you got emailed. There's a sample at the end of that, and there's also on that same page is a sample of the confidentiality agreement. One of the things that we really want to make sure is that you feel comfortable talking. We're going to talk about that when we talk about the tips when serving on the nominating committee. But you pick one person. This is the person who we think should be the next president. This is a person we think should be the next vice president, treasurer, secretary, and any other elected officers. The nominating committee members will sign this, and this will be publicized at least 7 days before the election meeting, and that's per all bylaws. At least 7 days. And when we say publicize, we mean in the normal channels of communication. So if you typically put something in your newsletter, then it should go in your newsletter. You need to plan your timing for that. If you typically are putting something in a flyer that goes home with the kids, if you put this out through email, however you typically communicate with your membership, that's how you would publish this report. And then the chair of the committee is going to be the person who will present the report at the election meeting. So like I said, some tips. You along with looking at your own campus, and this is especially important when we're looking at middle school and high school. Obviously, elementary, you don't really have that much in terms of feeder schools. You might have an early childhood center that feeds into you, but especially middle and high school, and it does get harder and harder to find people to serve on leadership positions as your kids get older. So definitely talk to those students that or parents that are coming up. A lot of our schools will have an open house for new parents or some kind of orientation for new parents. You really want to talk to those people. Talk to the current president of the parent group that's feeding into your school, and find out who might be good candidates for coming onto your PTA. I mentioned the confidentiality agreement. One of the big things is that everyone needs to be able to have honest and open communication. Like I mentioned, just because you were elected to be in a position one year, you're not automatically guaranteed to serve in that same position the following year. If you've done a great job, you should be kind of the #1 candidate. But maybe it wasn't a great match for you. And so you need to be able to have those conversations as a nominating committee, not gossip, facts, what really is their skills. And you really want to be considerate of those current office holders. You want to make sure that if there's a reason why you are not selecting them, hopefully there's something else that you feel that can use their skills better, and you can talk about that in terms of, it's not that we don't want you, it's that your particular skill set or maybe your commitment of time wasn't great for this particular position. But that maybe there is another position. We don't want anybody to feel that there's not a place for them in PTA. It may not be president, it may not be treasurer, it may not be one of these positions, but I hope that you will find a position that is a better fit for them. So we really want to be considerate of those people and find out what are their interests. Do they even want to return? Would they like to do something different? Those kinds of things. When you talk to potential nominees, please give them the full information about what they're getting into. There's nothing worse than somebody, my favorite is, oh, the president, they don't have to do anything. They just have to chair the meeting, and we'll help you, and we'll do everything for you. Well, talk to your president and find out if that's true. There's always, you want to give them accurate information. You don't want to be twisting anybody's arm to take on a position, because sometimes that means just putting a name, a warm body in a position, when really, somebody else might be better qualified, or maybe you need to leave that position open and find somebody later in the year. And that's always a possibility. If you really don't have somebody that has those skills that are needed, you might have to leave a position open. But definitely tell them what they're getting into, what kind of responsibilities they have, and it isn't always in the bylaws and standing rules. Sometimes that is going to come from the previous officer, and you should allow them to speak to the current officer to find out what the position is all about. I think that's really helpful. We can't promise a position to anybody either. And that's something that we really need to be careful when we're talking to potential nominees. You can slate that person as the next president or the next treasurer or whatever, but they still have to be elected. And so the nominating committee is putting what they think is the best choices together, but somebody can run from the floor against them, and it's not necessarily that they're going to get elected. The other thing that you really want to do is coordinate well with each other. And I encourage you to have whoever your elected chair is of the nominating committee, that person to be the central person that puts the offers out to nominees. I encourage that the other members make contact, do fact gathering, find out what people are interested in. There's nothing worse than two people are talking to two different people about a position and saying, oh, I think you're going to be the best treasurer ever, and then somebody else is telling somebody else, oh, you're going to be the best treasurer ever, and they bring it back to the group, and now two people think they're the best treasurer ever, and you've got to pick one of them. And so just be very careful about those kinds of things. In worst case, I've seen it where one committee member is actually promising, oh, we're going to slate you, and then somebody else is being promised the same thing, and that gets very, very tricky. We don't want to have hurt feelings. As I said, we want everyone to feel like they're part of PTA and that they're wanted. And so really we want to get a lot of information from people, and then we want to bring that back to the nominating committee. And then as a group together, you're going to decide who are the people that you think should be slated, and then generally the chair is the person who makes the outreach to those people and says, the nominating committee, not me personally, the nominating committee would like to select you as our next president. Are you willing to have us put your name on the slate? So you just want to be very careful about those things. And the other thing that you want to do is, as you're talking to people, you're going to talk to lots of people, and people will say, oh my gosh, no, I couldn't possibly be an officer. I'm really only interested in environmental stuff, or I'm only interested in art stuff with the kids. I really like that I'm helping the art teacher. Well, guess what? You could have a reflections chair, which is the National PTA Arts Awareness and Exploration Program. Maybe you want to try having a green team on your campus. Write those people's names down and their contact information. Write down what they said. They're really keen on the arts. They're really keen on environmental. They're really keen on, they just love reading to the kids. Maybe they're going to be a chair on a committee. Maybe they will work a shift at your book fair. You're going to want all those people's names at some point. They're not going to be officer names and it didn't work out. That's who you were looking for. But compile that list, and when the new board is elected, share that list with the new president so that that person kind of has a starting point to build the board and the committees and even the volunteers from. It's a great service to be able to provide that. If you've already done some of the work, it's nice to be able to pass that on to that next group, because you will talk to people, like I said, that just aren't interested in the particular position you're looking to fill, but might be interested in something else. So we're going to do a couple of frequently asked questions, and then if there are some questions on the nominating committee, go ahead and start writing those down in that questions section, and we'll take a little pause for Karen to kind of pass those on to me, and then we're going to go on to officer elections. So can't the president just appoint those committee members? Hopefully you already heard the answer to that. It is in the bylaws. They cannot appoint those. They have to be elected by the membership. Can the principal serve on the nominating committee? Absolutely. Anyone can serve on the nominating committee if they are elected. And sometimes it's really great to have someone like the principal or the community liaison or partners in education person be on that committee, because they might know a whole lot of volunteers. Does the alternate attend the meetings just in case they're needed? So do they go to those first few meetings because you never know, someone might drop off? No, they don't. When the first meeting is set up, that's when you get a sense of who's available, and whoever's on that committee to start with is pretty much going to continue. And so unless you've only had kind of a very preliminary meeting and somebody immediately drops off, the alternate is not going to serve. It's really if somebody knows, oh, I got called on jury duty for 3 weeks, I'm not going to be able to do this, or whatever situation happens, then the alternate becomes the committee member, and then that original person leaves and doesn't come back. Can a member of the nominating committee be nominated by the committee? So I sit on the nominating committee, but I really want to be secretary. Is that possible? Absolutely. So when that situation happens, the person who would like to be nominated should leave the room and let the rest of the nominating committee members discuss their nomination and discuss, in private, what do they think about you, being selected. It's not always comfortable. I've been in that situation many times. But it's better that they have that opportunity to do that. And then what you would do is you would come back and have a ballot vote. Now, if you're kind of their number one choice and they're like, oh my gosh, please be secretary again, it would be so awesome, you probably don't have to go through that formality of doing that. But if there's a couple, 2 or 3 different people that you're considering for a position, absolutely follow those procedures so that everything is above board, everything's up and up. And then you can vote by ballot. Everyone gets a ballot vote. It's private, and it's the majority of the committee members is who gets slated. What if you've got all your officers, you've got your lists, you even got it published, or maybe you don't, but you've got them all together. What if somebody changes their mind and says, no, I need you to take my name off. I can't be secretary. I thought it was going to work out, but it's not going to work out. The nominating committee's job is not over until the election. And so the nominating committee would work to, reconvene, would get back together and talk about, some of the other people they had talked with and see if there was somebody else they might like to slate into that position. But what if we search and search and we've talked to all kinds of people and we just cannot find someone to serve in one of these positions? Then unfortunately you have to leave the position vacant or open. And in that case, what happens is the elections will be taken from the floor during the election meeting, when the president conducts the elections. The president will take nominations from the floor, and if that still stays open, then it's the newly elected board's job to fill any vacant position. So, and how they do that is laid out in the bylaws. So before we move into officers, yes, do we have some questions?
Hi, Heather. Yes, we do. Does the nominating committee report only have the nominees' names, or should they include bio information?
Oh, good question. Excellent. Yes, and we're going to talk about that a little bit during the actual election process. But typically, the nominating committee form, like the report, only has their name. However, you need to be prepared at the election. If someone runs from the floor, the nominating committee, it would be the chair would stand up, or one of the designated people from the nominating committee would stand up and give their bio on their behalf. It certainly wouldn't be unacceptable to print their bios. If you notice, Texas PTA, National PTA, when we publish our slate, we do put people's bios. You need to be prepared. If the reason we do that is because to run from the floor for either of our groups, you have to give notice, like, I'm not even sure, months in advance for sure. And so then we also publish the people who run from the floor's bios. And so, that's kind of the situation there. But typically it's just their name, but you have the bio handy so that if they do run from the floor, that's exactly what happens, and I'll be covering that when we talk about elections.
That's the only question I had so far.
Okay, that's a really good one. All right, we're going to move on. If you think of something as you go through, as we're going through this, absolutely, you can always ask it. So, all right, so let's talk about the officers. So any person who is named as an officer in your bylaws is elected, except parliamentarian and historian, which are appointed with approval of the board. So not everyone has a historian. That is an optional position, but everyone has a parliamentarian. And so just like I said, the newly elected board, they're going to get together and they're going to fill in the remaining open positions, which would include these appointed positions, parliamentarian, and if you have chairs, standing committee chairs on your board, you're going to fill in those people. Some people have a faculty advisor beyond the principal. Some people have a student board member. And so that you would appoint those people, president appoints with approval of the board. Typical officers are president, any vice presidents, the secretary and treasurer. Those are always going to be officers. But some people have added in some things like, for instance, the one I can think of is council delegate. Sometimes they're an elected officer. I don't see that so much anymore, but they could be. They could be. New for 2017 is a position called president-elect. And if you have a president-elect position, that means that your president will no longer be elected each year. And let me explain that, because I think people are very confused. In the American election process, for instance, we just went through, and we called Donald Trump president-elect, right? From the time the vote went through, even until he took office, we called him president-elect. But in PTA, we use president-elect very differently. And so for PTA, president-elect would be an officer position listed in your bylaws, just like you have a treasurer, just like you have a secretary, just like you have a vice president. So you would have a president-elect, vice presidents, secretary, treasurer, and then whatever else you might have on your board. And so the president-elect automatically becomes the president the following year. And so what happens is when you elect your president-elect, you are already electing your next president. So once the very first year you have a president-elect, you elect the president-elect and the president, but after that, you only ever elect your president-elect because they will always move into president. What that also means is that your president can only serve 1 year because the president-elect is going to automatically move into that position the next year. What it also means is your president-elect, instead of signing up for 1 year like everybody else, treasurers 1 year, secretaries 1 year, now they can be reelected, but they have a 1-year term. Basically, the president-elect is saying, I'm going to be president-elect for 1 year, and then I'm going to be president for a year. And so they're making a 2-year commitment. And so the difference is the term that we use for that person who's been elected but hasn't yet taken office, we call them the newly elected president, or sometimes we'll say the year. So you have your elections in April. This is the 2017-18 president. That's your newly elected president. In the bylaws, you're going to see newly elected president calls a meeting 30 days after being elected. So that's the term we use for that interim period where you've had your elections, but they're not taking office yet. We call that newly elected president. President-elect, really we're only seeing that, and you would have to change your bylaws to add this president-elect position in your bylaws. It's most PTAs don't want to have this position. It doesn't really meet their needs because, number one, it's very difficult to get somebody to commit to 2 years, and they want to have that freedom to elect the next person from year to year instead of committing to 2 years to that person as well. It's really, really great in PTAs that really need the continuity, that they're doing so many things and they don't want to have that change every year. They really need to have somebody who will carry from 1 year to the next and continue with all of the plans they're doing, big project things that really need some continuity. It's really great for that. I think a lot of our councils, I wouldn't say a lot, but I mean some of our councils, this is a great position for them to have as well. Texas PTA has it because, again, we're looking at a large scope strategic planning that we need to have that continuity. And we're making, you get double term commitments there as well. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So officer requirements also in your bylaws. So did we have a question? I hear a click. No. Okay.
No, we didn't have any questions so far.
Okay, perfect. So the officers, like I mentioned earlier, it is in your bylaws. You do need to be a member prior to taking office. Officers take office at the beginning of the fiscal year. So again, look in your bylaws. What is your fiscal year? If your year goes to June 30th, then the newly elected officers take office July 1st. If your year goes to July 31st, they don't take office until August 1st. Okay, so the current board serves out until the end of your financial or fiscal year. Everyone serves one term, 1 year, but they can do a second year if they're elected or if they're appointed in the same position. You can serve, you know, unless your standing rules have a term limit, and I have seen that where you can only serve 10 years on a board or 12 years or whatever, 15 years on a board, and then you've got to move off. This would be in the same position. So,
Heather?
Yes.
Heather, we do have a question. Can the vice president also be the president-elect?
No, no. And this is going to be this fourth bullet here. We can only serve in one position at a time. Now, and if she's talking about newly elected president, yes, because so let's say you're the first vice president and you get elected to be the president for next year. So you finish this year as the vice president, but you are also the newly elected president. But if you have a president-elect position, that is a position that runs all year. And so everyone can only serve in one position at a time. I can only be the treasurer. I can only be the president. I can only be the president-elect. But you could be a newly elected officer for the following year. Is that making sense to them? Again, I think that's where the confusion with president-elect and newly elected president.
Okay,
so,
yes.
Duties are outlined in the bylaws and in your standing rules, if you have standing rules, of what is required of the officers. Like I said, you can only serve in one position at a time because you've only got one vote. So sometimes we see, I'm the vice president of programs, but we don't have a book fair chair, so I'm going to chair the book fair committee. Well, really, I can't have two positions. I can only be the higher position, which is the vice president. But what I can do is be acting chair of the book fair. So really, officially, the book fair chair position is open, and I am just fulfilling those duties. I'm not the book fair chair. I'm the vice president of programs. But I'm gonna act. I'm gonna fulfill those duties, and I'm gonna organize the book fair. So, but really important that on our rosters we leave those positions open. You can put in brackets just for clarity, you know, acting chair or acting, you know, that the person is basically temporarily kind of filling in that, doing the duty of that job. Because number one, you want other people to realize, oh, you don't have a book fair chair, maybe I'll step up and do that. If they think you're doing it all, they're not going to step up. They're going to think you guys have got it all covered. And number two, when you go to look at quorum, now how many people do you need to conduct business? And in the board, it's the majority of the board members. You don't want to be getting confused with people being listed in 2 and 3 different positions. And yeah, we have only got one vote, so I can't vote as book fair chair and as vice president. I can only be one person. And just this is the student rules, requirements, eligibility that I mentioned before. Not president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, or assigner, and not a majority of the offices. So we talked about that already. Okay, so we've got our nominating committee. They've come up with this slate of officers. It's been published 7 days in advance. This is awesome. We're at the meeting. The president is going to appoint a tellers committee just in case a ballot is needed. If they're not needed, they don't have to do anything. And they are going to call for the report of the nominating committee. And the nominating committee chair will come up and read the report and name the committee members that signed it and the date. The president is going to repeat that report, and the president is going to conduct the election. Okay, so the president does all of that stuff. Again, like I mentioned, there is a script in the President's Guide, and the Tellers Committee, I don't think I need to go over that again. It was going to be those 3 to 5 people who are unbiased, etc. Okay, and I think we're going to talk about that again just with the ballots. Just a quick review of that so you know. For each position, the President has to open the floor for further nominations. Okay, and so if you say, are there any other nominations for President? If there's no other nomination, then the vote you can actually do a voice vote, but if there are no other nominations, you can actually declare the vote by what's called acclamation. Because the thing is, in Robert's rules, you cannot vote against a nominated person. If they have been nominated, the only way to vote against them is to vote for someone else. So if there's no one else to vote for, they are automatically elected. And so the President would say, are there any further nominations from the floor? They would pause. Hearing none, Susie Q has been elected as our next President. Woot woot! And that's it. It's really, really easy. Now, if someone else does run from the floor, if there is another nomination from the floor, you must do a ballot. Okay, and this is the time when whoever makes those nominations is asked to present the candidate's credentials. The person can speak for themselves if they want to. I think it's really nice if the nominating committee has done some work and is really wants to look united and, hey, we've collected all this information on this person and can present the credentials out. It's usually time limited. You don't want to be there all night, and so we usually limit it to 2 minutes, and the President would do them. So you each have 2 minutes to present your credentials, or your nominator has 2 minutes to present your credentials. And then they can speak, and then you would do the ballot. And just a reminder, this is what we just covered. The difference here, though, is, remember, the nominating committee was by plurality, and that means the person who gets the most votes, all right? For election to an officer position, it is what we call majority vote, which means you have to get more than half of the votes that were cast. And so in this case, the Tellers Committee is going to write down number of votes cast, number of votes needed for election. So 50 votes were cast, 26 are needed for election. And then they're going to say the number of votes cast for each person and the number of illegal votes. The President's going to repeat that Tellers report and is going to declare the outcome of the vote. Okay? There are a couple of different ways you can do this, because you've got potentially 4, 8, 5, 6, I don't know how many officers you're electing. You can go one at a time, and are there any other nominations from the floor for President? Are there any for Vice President? Are there any for Secretary? Are there any for Treasurer? You can go through them one at a time, and you can do a separate ballot vote. If anybody runs from the floor, you can do a separate ballot for each one. The thing with that is it's kind of time consuming, because you have to wait for the ballot from the Tellers Committee to come back with the count before you can go on to the next election. Because if I run for Vice President and I don't get it, I might want to run also then for Secretary. And so it gives me that opportunity to do that. Now you can run for more than one position, but if you get elected to 2 positions, then you've got to withdraw your name anyhow, and the other person has to be elected. So it can get a bit tricky here. So you can do a ballot. What you can do is do a ballot for all contested elections at the same time, or do them one by one. If nobody runs from the floor, it's really simple. You just do, and that's our typical scenario. Nobody runs from the floor. You just go through each position. You might have one contested position. But I also have seen it where there's been 3 contested positions, and then, like I said, you can just do, they can only write one name for each position, and you can do all the ballots all at the same time. Now, you don't have to wait for the report to come back to go on to some other business. You can have your report of your membership. You can have, whatever other reports. You could even have your program. If you have a parent ed program, or maybe you've got a speaker there to talk about something, or your kids are going to perform, whatever your program is, you can go on with that. You don't adjourn the meeting. And then when the tellers committee comes back with their report, then you conduct that business. So you can do your announcements, and there's a lot of things you can do while you're waiting for that report to come back, rather than just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. So that all comes back. The president then, as I said, reads those tellers' report and is going to announce the newly elected officers. I like it when people, this is optional, but I really like it when all those officers can stand to be recognized. You want them known. You want people to want to approach them to serve on next year's board, or volunteer, or somehow help with the PTA, support the PTA. If there's time, it's really nice if the newly elected president can say a few words. Again, trying to encourage people to join, to get involved. And then also optional is an installation of officers ceremony. If your election, for instance, is in April and you have another meeting in May, sometimes people will invite their council president or their field service rep or somebody to come and do an installation of officers. It can be anything as just simple as making kind of this PTA oath, or you can make it really fun where, like, I like to give $100,000 bars, to the treasurer because they're going to be handling these millions of dollars, or or they're all out of space, give them all a Milky Way bar or something fun. So it can be a fun thing, or it can just be a pretty straightforward ceremony. You can do it at the election meeting, but typically it's taking a little bit longer, and you just have to be prepared to do a little more generic of an installation ceremony. But if you know the names of the people and all the officers, it can be a little bit more elaborate at your following meeting. Strictly optional. It's nice to celebrate. It's kind of like a swearing in sort of thing. Not required at all, just kind of fun. Then the newly elected officers, as I mentioned, they are going to be assuming office at the beginning of the next fiscal year. However, in the bylaws, it does say that the newly elected president will call a meeting within 30 days of the election, like I mentioned, to appoint whoever else is on your board, right? So parliamentarian for sure, historian and standing committee chairs could be optional, other board members as listed in your bylaws, and that's going to be in your bylaws, who's on your board, and that is subject to the rest of the newly elected officers' approval. And it also has a provision in the bylaws that at that same meeting, you can conduct any other business as shall become necessary. This is a great time for the new people to get together and talk about what are their goals going to be for next year. What do they want to focus on? They could even begin their plans of work. They definitely want to talk about budget and what are we going to do for you want to have a budget in place at the end of the school year before you leave office, so that the current board can get that approved for you, so that you have money in the summer and to go forward into the fall. You'll amend that budget in the fall, but you want to have something in place. Okay. All right, we're down to the last slide. What if there's no quorum at the election meeting? We cannot conduct any business without quorum. Check your bylaws for what that is. The minimum we allow is 10, but your bylaws could say something else. They might be 15, it might be 20. So you can recess the meeting or do non-business items like announcements while people try and get members to get there so that you can actually conduct the election, or you might have to reschedule it to another time when you can get quorum. But you cannot conduct your election without quorum. You must have quorum there. What if someone's nominated for more than one position? We talked about that already. What if the president is one of the nominees? So they're maybe returning as president, or maybe now they want to, they're going to do a different position. That's fine. Nothing changes. The president still continues to be, runs the election. It feels a little awkward, but they're the president. They're the one who does the business. What if there is a tie between two candidates? You get these ballots back and it's exactly the same. You have got to reballot until there's a majority winner. Generally, what you're going to do is ask each candidate to speak again, telling maybe a little bit more information about themselves so that it can help people change the vote, but you need to have a majority winner. What happens if an officer resigns after they're elected, but before they assume office? And we talked about that earlier. Hopefully you remember that the newly elected board are the people who are going to fill open positions, and that includes resignations. So just some resources. You're going to get a copy of this slide deck from Karen. She's going to email that out to you. These are our websites. I talked about the Texas PTA website. You want to go to PTA support, and under PTA support you're going to see a leadership little box, and if you go in there you're going to see where all of the webinars for each position and the resource guides that we mentioned. So, did anybody have any questions on the second half? I just realized that it's 8. We've filled our hour, and so I'm sorry I talked too much. It's a fact.
Not as of right now. And like Heather said, I'll be sending this out to everyone. If you have any questions, you can always shoot us an email or give us a call.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for attending, and I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.